going to talk about King Arthur Pendragon. So what is it? Who is it? King Arthur Pendragon, which I will heretofore afterwith refer to as Pendragon, is a role-playing game created in 1985 by Greg Stafford. If you haven't heard that name before, you might remember seeing his majestic bust at the RPG Designer Hall of Fame and Wax Museum, alongside the illustrious Gary Gygax, who created a game called Dungeons and something. Anyways, Greg Stafford founded a company called Chaosium, which I liked better before I found out it was named after Chaos and Colosseum, and so is maybe pronounced Chaosium? Nobody needs to know this. They publish a lot of the biggest games in the industry, including Call of Cthulhu, 7th Sea, RuneQuest, and, oh yeah, Pendragon. So what's the deal with Airline Peanuts? Pendragon is currently on edition 5.2 and is back in the control of Chaosium after having switched hands several times over the years. Of all his game projects, Greg Stafford considered Pendragon his masterpiece, his magnum opus. We know this because Wikipedia always tells the truth. Having spent many hours playing this game myself, I'll vouch that it is unique, streamlined, and it reeks of the blood, sweat, and tears that went into making it. Seriously, this game sits alongside Dwarf Fortress in the hallowed halls of games that shouldn't exist but do anyway, because their creators cared more about mastering their craft than making money, and were willing to spend decades working on a single thing obsessively. Now, I'm not sure how Greg Stafford actually felt about the subject, and I don't know how much time he actually put into this game, but it is absurd. I want to start with what's probably the most important and unique thing about Pendragon, and that is the Great Pendragon Campaign. Many tabletop role-playing games offer you a choice. Run a pre-published campaign, or create your own world from scratch, or use a campaign setting. While Pendragon is very much about telling your own story, it uses the Arthurian legend as a backdrop pretty much exclusively, but it's more than that. Really what it does is give you a history in which your characters can exist, and I don't use that term lightly. The Great Pendragon Campaign is a massive book, over 400 pages long, and it chronicles the entire Arthurian legend as a role-playing campaign, from before Arthur is born to after his death and beyond. This is an 81-year span from 485 to 566 where you can choose any year, flip to it in the book, and it will give you an adventure to run that year revolving around the events of the Arthurian saga. From the reign of the previous king, to the anarchy following his fall, to the establishment of the Kingdom of Camelot, through conquests, romance, tournaments, the quest for the Holy Grail, and the twilight of Arthur's kingdom. You can see what major events and battles are going on, what the major characters are up to, often in multiple different regions of Britain, along with fully fleshed stories that you can run straight out of the book, or adventure seeds and suggestions for what might be happening in your story. Each game session is meant to encompass approximately a single year so that you never run out of developments and drama, and so your campaign can span literal lifetimes. That's right, your characters can grow old and die in this game, and they can have children, and those children can grow up to carry on their legacy and become the new player characters. You're not just telling the story of a single character or adventuring party, you're telling the story of an entire family over multiple generations during the rise and fall of Arthur's kingdom. The treasures you find, the oaths you swear, the battles you fight, the glory you earn, the love affairs you pursue, and the enemies you make trickle down to affect the lives of your children's children should you keep going long enough to play as them. So who are you in this game? Pendragon assumes and is designed around the premise that the player characters are knights, usually having sworn loyalty to a particular noble whom they serve with their lives. This stands in stark contrast to most role-playing games where the character's profession or class may vary wildly. There are supplemental game materials you can use to play as ladies or wizards or other types of characters in the setting, but that is definitely presented as the exception to the rule. Does this mean that all characters are the same? Not in the least. Just as each of the Knights of the Round Table have their own virtues, flaws, skills, traditions, lineages, and personalities, player characters in this game can be extremely varied. This brings us to one of my favorite parts, which perfectly marries theme and mechanics. Personality traits. Characters in Pendragon choose where they fall on 13 separate sliding scales of virtues and vices. Chaste versus lustful, energetic or lazy, forgiving or vengeful, generous or selfish, honest or deceitful, just or arbitrary, merciful or cruel, modest or proud, pious or worldly, prudent or reckless, temperate or indulgent, trusting or suspicious, valorous or cowardly. At the risk of going too deep into mechanics, I'll just say that each of these pairs is always forced to add up to a particular value. So if you gain a point in one trait, you lose a point in the opposing trait. These trait pairs come into play in a few ways. If you get a very high or very low score in a particular trait, it earns you glory because you become famous for it. This rewards playing characters with strong personalities. There's also a two-directional relationship between trait values and role-playing. If your character acts in a way that exemplifies a particular trait, the Game Master can force you to put a check mark next to it on your sheet, and at the end of the session, it may shift in that direction. But inversely, conversely, oppositely, if you have a very high score in a particular trait and you try to roleplay against it, you may have to roll a die to see if you're allowed to roleplay that way. This may sound a bit constraining, but in practice it really forces players to stay in character. The game will make you think hard about it, roll a die to see if you can bring yourself to do it, and then update your character sheet to reflect your new moral outlook if you go through with it. All this system does is force players to play with some amount of forethought and consistency. It even makes it easier to improvise, because if you're not sure how your character would react to a situation, you can just look at your sheet and roll a die or pick based on the numbers. Of course, the game is rich with mechanics beyond these personality traits. Core die mechanics will be very basic and familiar to most RPG players, pun intended, since they share common DNA with the basic role-playing rules engine Chaosium is known for. There's a list of skills, and the skills go up when you use them, sometimes. Most actions you perform involve rolling a d20 and comparing it to a target number. There's not that many different modifiers to keep track of, just a lot of different numerical values on your sheet. Combat in Pendragon is abstract and narrative rather than tactical. In battles and skirmishes, you mostly roll on random tables to see what situation your character gets into. Then you roll on one or more of your skills to see if you escape without consequences. Occasionally you get decision points where you can make small risk-reward trade-off choices, but this is not a game about math, positioning, or low-level battlefield tactics. When you get in fights, it usually feels fairly terrifying because you're in little control of the outcomes, and injury or death are always a possibility. On the upside, glory is gained whenever you fight, and usually in large quantities. A character who has charged into many battles head-on and survived is a famous and influential one indeed. Other cool systems, which I'll mention but not go into detail on right now, are designing the heraldry for your character, mounts, jousting, squires, passions, managing your estate and earnings, heritable family traits, religions, homelands, randomly generated family histories, and a bunch of other stuff. Pendragon is a massive game, but it's relatively easy to play and get into. It's also particularly good for campaigns where you have a lot of players joining and leaving. You could play this game for 20 sessions, then put it down, walk away for 2 years, and immediately have some adventure ready to go. It's detailed, it's well researched, and you can see the author's passion for the source material on every page. Anyways, thanks for listening. I could easily make a video 5 times this long delving into all the things I like about Pendragon and how they work, but I hope this gave you a good overview, and if this game interests you, please go pick it up. It has stood the test of time. It sounds like it's currently being polished and updated for another new edition, and it's always going to be one of the gems of my collection that I love telling people about. As a parting thought, of all the games you can get inspired by, convince your friends to play, spend weeks prepping for, then rage quit when they won't stop making Monty Python jokes, this is the best one. If you like this video and want to see more, please like, subscribe. Feel free to check out our live RPG streams on Twitch, which we post recordings of on YouTube. Just search for the Wanderers Guild. And as always, game big. Is game big taken? Somebody comment and give me a better catchphrase.